Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane and Hurricane HD video blog for Saturday, August the 4th, 2012. The tropics very busy. We have Florence now, and as you may have heard, it is the third earliest named storm for this time of the year that we have reached the sixth named storms, what I'm trying to say. Behind 1936 and 2005, only those seasons were busier up to this point in the year. Not that it matters much. I guess for historical records it's kind of a novelty. Then we have Ernesto here, the bigger story. Although we're going to have to watch Florence, it may not just die out here, and that's the end of it, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Then we have this low potential area of disturbed weather that at the most I think could bring some squally weather to portions of the Florida East Coast, and maybe even, of course, over the mainland portion of the peninsula, but that's about it. Looking at Ernesto, definitely more curved, banded structure to it, although it is pulling some drier air off of South America, some downsloping winds coming off the mountains of Hispaniola. That will help to slow it down a little bit intensification-wise, more than likely. But once it gets over to this region, it should start to react to the warmer water and eventually become a hurricane. National Hurricane Center's forecast track. Interesting how it kind of bends back almost due west here for a time and then heads on off more to the west-northwest and into the Yucatan of Mexico. Looking at a different forecast plot, this comes from our client services site where we plot the positions over tropical cyclone heat potential maps, and you can see what happens here over a pretty good area of heat potential or heat content now, and then it gets really warm, the water, later on. And what this means is that the water is warm at the surface, yes, but it's also warm 100, 200 meters below. That deep, warm layer provides more ocean heat content than just the skin of the ocean being warm. And therefore, when you see these whites in here and the reds, that is indicating very deep and warm water. That 80-degree line goes way down in the ocean, and that helps to provide a lot of extra fuel. And as you can see, it does cross pretty high heat content here as it approaches the Yucatan, and that could be an issue for folks there next week. Now, I wanted to go over the GFS, the latest run, the 12Z run, and what it shows, the different steering mechanisms. We're looking at 500 millibar chart here. This is about 18 to 20,000 feet in the atmosphere at the 500 millibar level. And I'm looking for a few things here. Does Ernesto show up at the 500 millibar level? In other words, does it reach, does its vorticity or energy reach up that high into the atmosphere? And the initial conditions show that generally, yes, it does. We also have this big old Bermuda high sitting up here, and a nice continental high sitting over the southern United States. A tiny little weakness in between, but it's insignificant in the evolution of Ernesto. So let's move it ahead. This is valid Sunday morning. Tomorrow morning, you see Ernesto here, not very well represented in the model, but I don't think that matters because we do have pretty strong high pressure outlined to the north, almost connected. This is like a large mountain of air, and this just cannot turn into it. This air mass, less dense than this big old area of hot, high pressure. We call this sort of a heat bubble or a heat ridge. These subtropical ridges are denser than these tropical cyclones, and so they can't just move into it. These have to weaken and erode away like a mountain to allow a stream to cut through, if you will. And we don't really have that, at least in the 24-hour time frame. At 48 hours, yeah, maybe a slight weakening of the ridge up here, but still pretty strong. After all, it's early August. We don't have these big troughs carving in and leaving a path for something to turn into. That will come at the end of the month and into September. Going on to 72 hours. Ernesto still not showing up very well in the 500 millibar field, but again, I don't think that matters, as we do have fairly strong mid-level high pressure in place to sort of block it from turning into the Gulf of Mexico, at least the eastern and central portion. I just don't see how that's going to happen based on these larger scale weather features, regardless of how Ernesto shows up. Even if it's not there, who cares? You still have this. This is certainly there. And whether or not the model sees this correctly does not change the outcome of what this big old area of high pressure is. So, I don't know. I've been reading about it on message boards that if it doesn't initialize the storm correctly, how can you trust the model? Well, you got to look at the other players, the other pieces, and they are certainly not initialized incorrectly, I wouldn't think. Nonetheless, if we go to 96 hours, Ernesto's showing up a little bit better in the 500 millibar pattern as it closes in on the Yucatan. Yeah, there's a little bit of a weakness here in the pressure field that if Ernesto was up here, I can see how it would get drawn into the central Gulf. But it's going to be far enough away that there's just enough ridge in place to shove this on into the Yucatan, and that's where it's going to be a problem. At day 5, sitting over the Yucatan, day 6, look at that. There's still enough of that ridge that builds back in to keep Ernesto tucked away down in the Bay of Campeche. A big rain and wind event for the Yucatan. Bad news for you folks down there. Northern Belize, central Yucatan, all the way up to Cancun maybe, and then finally a week out, it just stays buried down there according to this run of the GFS. As you see, really strong high pressure now building in to the north. It's just not going to allow it to go into Texas. You cannot plow tropical cyclones into 500 millibar ridges. They just don't do that. It's like trying to throw a ping pong ball through a very thick water balloon. You know, it's just not going to work. The ping pong ball will bounce off, and that's that. Here is Florence showing up at day 7, not too far to the southeast of Bermuda, which is right there. So you folks in Bermuda are going to want to watch that. And there it is showing up in the 500 millibar field. But this trough coming in, unless it lifts out in time, should take Florence with it, if in fact it is here. We'll watch that. Could be on the map a little bit longer than the Hurricane Center is forecasting. So, first up though, the Yucatan. Maybe a brush with Jamaica for Ernesto, but tomorrow I'll focus on the impacts of the Yucatan and what Ernesto will bring to that region next week. Alright, again, I am Mark Sudduth, my website, hurricanetrack.com. Hope you learned something from today's video blog. I'll have another one for you tomorrow.